I'd like to welcome all of the authors to join me on camera for the Transcending the Binary in YA panel. Hey all.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, hello everyone.
No.
Hello.
Hey.
Oh my God, AM, your background. Incredible.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding me to unmute my mic.
Oh my God, there's so many of us. This is amazing. Wow. Okay. I am so excited about this because we are sitting here with BookCon's first panel with absolutely zero cis people on it, which is amazing.
The agenda is complete.
Yes. And we have been so excited about this, and we were so bummed when BookCon got canceled because of very, very, very valid safety concerns. But we're so excited to be here, and thank you so much to BookCon for giving us this platform, and thank you so much to everybody who is tuning in. We are just overjoyed to be able to talk to you guys about smashing the binary, gender binary specifically, but you know, every binary, why not? But yeah, so I'm going to start off by just giving everybody a chance to introduce yourself, your titles, and your pronouns. So I'll start. My name's Casey McQuiston. I'm moderating this. I am the author of Red, White, and Royal Blue and the upcoming One Last Stop, and my pronouns are she, her, or they, them. Anybody want to take it away?
I'll go. My name is Mason Deaver. I'm the author of I Wish You All the Best and the upcoming The Ghosts We Keep, and my pronouns are they, them.
I'm Kacen Callender. I'm the author of Felix Ever After, and I use they, them pronouns and sometimes he, him pronouns.
I'm Victoria Lee. I'm the author of The Fever King and the Electric Air and the upcoming Lesson in Vengeance. I use all of the pronouns. I'm bi gender. Right now I prefer she, her, they, them.
I am Charlotte Nicole Davis. I'm the author of The Good Luck Girls and its upcoming sequel, and I use she, her, or they, them.
Hi everyone, my name is Mark Oshiro. There are so many of us, I'm so excited. I'm the author of Anger's a Gift and the forthcoming Each of Us a Desert, which is out this September. Like Kacen, I use they, them, and also sometimes he, him.
My name's Aiden Thomas. I'm the author of Cemetery Boys, which is coming out in September, and my pronouns are he, they.
Hi, I'm Anna Marie McLemore. My latest book is Dark and Deepest Red, and my pronouns are they, them.
Is that everybody? There's so many of you.
Sure, everywhere.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I'm just gonna get into it. I think something that we've probably all experienced as non-binary people is sometimes we are encountering people who are cis or who are not spending a lot of time around the queer trans community, who may not even be aware of what non-binary is or that it is a thing. So I would love to hear from you guys in your own words about, you know, when you say the words, I am non-binary or I am trans, what does that mean to you? And I'm gonna just kick this to Mark to start us off.
Oh, what? Oh my God, okay, I'm ready.
Sorry, put you on the spot.
No, I love it, because it's weird with these Zoom things too. Because we're not in person, you never really know who's about to talk, so great, great plan.
Yeah.
So what it means for me, because this has been a long journey, there's some people in this wonderful chat who I actually came out to before I came out in public. Hi, friends. You're all lovely and wonderful. It's something I've been dealing with for years. So for me, being able to say I'm non-binary is really just talking about the title of this panel. It's about smashing the binary, because it has taken me years to figure out how much the binary hurts me. And speaking as someone who for a long time thought they were a cis gay man, and thinking that the stuff that was going on internally, especially with my relation to my body, was dysmorphia, which is very common among cis gay men, and being able to realize, no, that's actually not what's happening at all. So I think for me, the joy of getting to say I'm non-binary is to really say that I do not exist at either end of this spectrum. That is not who I am. And also the freedom of it, which is I don't actually have to tell you every single day. Because there's this idea that non-binary means I'm 60% man, I'm 40% woman today. And I'm like, no, that's actually not what it is at all. I'm not, like, it's not a math. I'm not a fraction. Also, no to numbers. Numbers are homophobic. So yeah, that's what it means to me, is this beautiful space of that's just not who I am. This is who I am.
Mm-hmm. Anybody want to add to that?
I'm pretty new. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Anna. It's fine.
I'm pretty newly out too, so I'm kind of figuring this out as I go along. For me, it's been about learning to love and celebrate in myself what I already loved and celebrated in other people. I've been married for a while to a trans guy that I met as a teen, so I've been celebrating non-binary identity for a while. It's just taken me a while to celebrate it in myself. So for me, it means doing what I want with gender. It means loving teen me who is trans masculine, even though I went back in the closet. It means loving every part of me. It means wearing a binder and a flower crown, if that's what my gender is on a particular day.
Yes. Mason, you were saying something too?
I mean, Anna or AM just kind of doubled down on the point that I was going to make. Like, it's just being yourself some days. It's just having the courage and the strength to just be who you are. And sometimes it is just as easy as that.
Yeah. So everybody on this panel, just by being an author in YA and by being a non-binary trans person, is challenging norms in the industry. And I think that is something that is amazing, and it's something that also can be hard and scary. And I just would love to talk a little bit about if you've ever gotten pushback or had to face some obstacles about trying to write stories with non-binary and trans characters. Kacen, do you want to start us off on that one?
Did you know that I was ready, like absolutely ready to talk about Kirkus?
Oh yeah. Fired up today.
Oh boy.
So, I mean, the biggest and only honestly pushback I've gotten so far from Felix was from Kirkus, which is a trade journal reviewer, which had like a really transphobic review. I shouldn't be that surprised because a lot of marginalized voices have been complaining about Kirkus for a while now for the mistakes that they've made, but they basically made a suggestion that the transphobia that Felix feels throughout the book or struggles with throughout the book is exhausting, is the word that they used, which just kind of suggests that my life is exhausting, all the pain that I feel is exhausting, and is not something that cis readers will want to read for entertainment. So that didn't feel good. And they also used incorrect terminology. So they said, sorry, my cat came in. So they, for example, used double mastectomy instead of top surgery, and they said trans boy as one word instead of two separate words. And then they said Felix is no longer a girl.
Basic stuff.
Yeah, awesome. So I think the biggest frustration out of everything that happened though was that they went ahead and changed the terms. So made it seem like they were actually knowledgeable about what they were talking about, but they left the kind of like essence of the transphobia in the review. They did not make a notation. They didn't say on the website, sorry, we made this incorrect use of language so that people would be able to see that they didn't know what they were talking about before. So it makes them seem like they understand what they're talking about. And they still haven't apologized. There's been absolutely no accountability.
Yeah. I mean, that's so frustrating. And I'm sure some of you guys have had similar experiences. Anybody else have something that they want to share that they've experienced in just trying to tell trans stories?
I have one. I've talked about this with Mason and Kacen as well, like this difficulty in writing trans stories that are close to what you're experiencing and what you've gone through, but you're not out yet. So people tell you you're writing out of your lane and the representation that you wrote is inaccurate. And you're like, oh, but it's actually, and so that's the struggle, because I think one of the things that was really hard for me is I actually wanted to come out before Anger is a Gift was out. I wanted to be out. I wanted to have this be my thing. And I experienced so much homophobia and racism before Anger is a Gift came out that I was like, let me not add another little cherry on top of this hate Sunday. Like, I was like, it's so hard already. What if I add this thing to it? How much more harassment am I going to get? And so, you know, I have not only trans characters, but I have a non-binary character named Bits, who is exactly how I want to be represented in a book, where I don't want them to ever be gendered. There's no dead naming. You never know this person's what gender they were assigned at birth, and I'll never tell anyone. For me, it was a fantasy, and I wanted to have a character that just existed that way. At the same time, I understand why that criticism happens, because so often we see cis authors writing these characters and they just don't get it, and they mess up in so many ways. So it's that difficult struggle of how do you critique this without also violating someone's privacy, and then also what sort of responsibility does a creator have to be upfront with their audience, and where is that line? Like, it's complicated. Like, I don't actually have an answer. I don't know. But that was something that was really hard to deal with, because my response had to be like, there was so many times where I was like, well, my response to this should be, I should just come out, but that shouldn't be the reason I come out. Like, I should come out because I feel safe, and I feel like I can tell this truth about who I am to the whole world.
Yeah, that makes me think of a similar situation I've been dealing with, where I want to represent as many trans characters as possible, but I can only really speak confidently to my own experience. So, you know, my first book, I do have a trans masked girl like myself. And that was very much me writing from the heart. But in the second book, I'm trying to write a trans girl. And I was really thinking to myself, I was like, okay, you know, I really want there to be a trans girl in this girl gang. You know, the conceit of the book is that there's this girl gang in the Old West. And I want there to be a trans girl with them. So it was really important to me to include that. But I also was like, you know, as my own experience, you know, there's no universal queer experience, or certainly no universal trans or non-binary experience. So this is the kind of thing where it's like, okay, I can speak to some of these things, but other things, you know, I want to make sure I talk to my friends about and make sure I'm getting it right, because I do want to include it, but I want to do it correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, when I was writing Cemetery Boys, which features a trans boy, I was so worried about getting it wrong. And I think that that's something that cis creators don't really worry about. But then for me, I insisted that I got sensitivity readers for a trans boy for, you know, the Latinx experience. And a lot of people were surprised by that. And I think it speaks to how non-binary and trans creators feel about their work, and how they really don't want to be putting harm out into the community, especially to our readers, especially to young readers. And that was really important for me. And I am still worried that like something got through, but I'm also very aware that I have my own internalized stuff. And if that made that onto the page and ended up hurting a reader, that would be the worst case scenario for me. So I haven't had many hiccups in terms of like proper publishing themselves. I have an incredible team at Swoon Reads. When I came out to them, they were super welcoming. And then when I got top surgery, my whole team sent me a care package for my top surgery, which was the most special thing that's ever happened to me. So I've been very lucky. I think so far, most of my hangups have been my internalized stuff.
Yeah. So I would love to talk a little bit about genre, because we have like such a great diversity of genre on this panel. And I want to start with, a lot of y'all write sci-fi fantasy. And I'm curious if you feel like that genre gives you more room to explore and mess around with gender in your stories. And I'll throw that to AM to start that.
So I write magical realism. I also write fairy tale reimagining. And fairy tales end up often as very gendered spaces, but that's not actually true universally. It's true of a lot of the fairy tales that have been popularized, especially in this country. The ones we know best very binarily. Is that binarily? Is that an adverb? Is that a word? I don't know. I should be a writer. But that a lot of fairy tales and other traditions, including Mesoamerican fairy tales that I grew up with, are not gendered in that much of a binary way. So fairy tales are kind of a place where I can reclaim both. I can reclaim being non-binary. I can reclaim being queer and Latinx, kind of all at the same time. And I can be a Disney prince and a Disney princess at the same time, kind of like I wanted to be growing up. So it's a place to sort of it's a place to live those dreams that have been there, even if they get erased by what we know most popularly sometimes.
Yeah,
I think I feel the same way. You know, in The Fever King, for example, which was my debut book, there was no homophobia, and every character on the page was queer in some way or another. And part of why I felt like that was so liberating, I guess, is because the assumption in most literatures that the default is cis and straight. And so I wanted to create a world where the default was queer. And it would be super unusual if you were to encounter a character in this book that wasn't that way or wasn't assumed to be at least, bisexual. And I'm writing a book right now. I feel like weird talking about it because it's not published. I'm just writing it, but I am writing like my first book with a trans protagonist right now. And I'm trying to construct a world in which there's oppression that people face in that world, but it has nothing to do with gender. Nobody cares that he's trans. He comes out and he gets top surgery and everyone just switches and, completely accepts his gender identity. When he's taught about when he's a child, like there's no dead naming, there's no incorrect pronouns used. And that's a world that I hope that we're able to move into. And I think that part of what is valuable about sci-fi and fantasy is being able to show possible worlds and being able to show the ramifications of having more equality and how easy it would be to treat people that way, and to how gratifying it would feel to be that person, to feel so completely accepted and so unquestioned in your gender.
Yeah, for Cemetery Boys, kind of going off what AM said, magic, I feel, is often gendered, right? There's so many stories that we can think of where the men have this power and the women have that power. And so when I was writing Cemetery Boys, that's something I wanted to push against. Yadril is raised in a Brewhex community where that's their belief. The women heal, the men release spirits to the afterlife. And they've kind of that's their tradition. That's what they're stuck in. That's what they believe in. But with Yadril, and what we find out at the very beginning of the story is that the magic isn't binary. It's not tied to you like that, because Yadril, one of the first things that he learns is that he has the powers of the men. He has the powers of the Brujo. The magic is not like transphobic, basically. The magic speaks to who you are. The magic understands who you are and reflects that. And for me, that was really important, just because I feel like that's a really heavy trope in magic and fantasy right now, or in general, like just all over the place. And I wanted to be like, no, like Lady Death, who is the patron of these Brewhex, she knows who you are. She understands who you are. She loves you and accepts you for exactly who you are. And that's what Yad's experience is when he calls to her, and he's so scared, and he's like, please don't like make me have these Bruja powers. And he's gifted with that, and it's this really huge lightning moment. And all of a sudden Yadril's like, this world and our magic works in a way that no one would ever even let me think was possible. So that was really important for me for writing Cemetery Boys.
And it's done so well, Aiden. I love your book so much. Cemetery Boys said trans rights. That's right. So I'm in this unique position because my first book was contemporary, and now I'm moving into the fantasy magical realism space. And the beauty about writing contemporary is like, this is our world. Deal with it. And every time I hear like, this is unrealistic, why is this character trans? Why is this? And I'm like, because that's what Oakland looks like. The end. Go do some research. Like, you're just wrong. Moving to the fantasy space, what's really fun is that sense of not only can you play with myth and play with fairy tale, but like I'm learning like, well, you can do whatever you want in a fantasy, like literally anything. And so I got to imagine a world where people's pronouns and the way that their gender works what if there's a world, so what I got to do was, what if there's a world with no transphobia, except in one specific thing that I wanted to address. And I'm curious if this is an experience with other people too, which is that as I started to come out privately, people started treating me different in this really weird, almost infantilizing way, where they're like, oh, you're like one of the special ones, and you're so special and unique and magical. And I'm just like, yo, I'm still the same person. And so I have these characters who are not any sort of binary at all in terms of what gender is in this world, but people treat them almost like magical creatures. And you're like, yo, that's still dehumanizing. Like, that's still weird. And it's like complicated because you're like, I'm glad you accept me, but it's sort of that, like what we see in our world, that weird liberal acceptance where you're not just accepted, but then you're immediately elevated and put on a pedestal, and you're like, oh, you're just better than all of us. And it's like, I don't want to be up here. I don't like that. So that was what I got to do, and to flip it into a fantasy world, which is super fun. And very, I don't know, it feels very rewarding and fulfilling to be able to do something like that.
Yeah. Charlotte, Kacen, I know you guys have both dabbled in different elements of incorporating that into fantasy. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so the books that I've been writing, the patriarchy does exist in this world, and they're trying to take it down. But I made a conscious decision not to show any homophobia or transphobia on the page. So it's understood that it exists in this world, and these characters are escaping from it, but none of the good guys have to be taught anything. They all just I just made a decision. Then, like you said, fantasy, you can really do whatever you want. And I was like, okay, this is just, everybody here gets it. Nobody's going to be dead naming anybody. Nobody's going to be, trying to make anybody feel like they don't belong or anything like that. So I just really wanted to make it, I know safe space is such a cliche phrase, but it's like, this really should be a fun read first, sort of my goal.
Yeah.
And it is, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I kind of want to, since I'm keeping an eye on the clock, so I'm going to combine two of my questions into one question, and it's going to be a very loaded question, so I am sorry. But these are two issues that I think have come up a couple times on this panel, and that I see discussed online and discussed in the book community often. And so I would love to just bring it up and let us all talk about it a little bit, which is what do we do? How do we feel about cis authors writing trans characters and non-binary characters? And B, what do you think are best practices for approaching, when you have a trans character in your story, and the issue of dead naming or of misgendering that person, just general idea of best practices for both of these issues. And I'll go ahead and kick that to Mason, since Mason did not get to jump into the fantasy.
I adore fantasy, but I can never write it. Oh God, that is a loaded question. When it comes to cis writers doing trans characters, it is such a mixed bag for me, because off the top of my head, I can name Ashley Herring Blake. She has a non-binary character in Girl Made of Stars that I think is really well done, and is really, it's just because she's a character. She's not trying to make any statement or take a space away from a trans author, which I think that if you're going to do that, that would be the proper way. If a cis writer told me they were writing a trans perspective, I immediately check out. I can't do it. There are things that people just don't get right, that I don't trust cis people to understand necessarily. I just don't really trust it. when it comes to writing the other perspectives, because you don't want your book to be all cis, all white. I was tuning into the panel before us, and I wish I could remember who said it. I think it was TJ Klune who said, like, you have to be doing your research. You have to talk to members of this community that that are part of like the marginalization that you want to write. You have to, because I'm gonna paraphrase TJ. Like, you can have a million editors all telling you the same thing. You can have a billion sensitivity readers, but it's your words. It's your words that are on the page. It's your word. It's your name that is on the cover of the book, and that's what people are going to pay attention to. So if you're going to do this, you have to be willing to put in the work to do it.
Yeah. Aiden, I know that dead naming is something I've seen you talk about before as something that comes up in your book. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so just to start it with, I believe that there's a difference between a cis writer writing a trans character and about their trans experience and having representation. I am totally behind cis authors having trans characters as like side characters, again, where you're not trying to tell the story of what it's like to be a trans person. When it comes to actually writing the trans experience and a trans main character, cis people, it's not their place. It's not their place. They are ill-equipped. They also haven't proved themselves to be able to handle these topics. So having representation would be a good start for that. When it comes to dead naming, and I'm not going to say trans writers can write dead naming all they want. That's individual people's experiences. I have nothing against that. But again, for cis authors, there's absolutely no reason that a character needs to be dead named. For me, even as a trans writer, I do not dead name Yadril one bit. He gets dead named in the story, but I never say what the dead naming is. And I think people, when it comes to dead naming and when it comes to misgendering, it comes from a very cis perspective. They're like, oh, this needs to be said out loud, and like, oh, look at this hardship that this trans character is going through. But it's very performative, especially when they make the conscious decision to use a dead name. You do not need to use a dead name on the page in order to get across the feeling of being dead named. So for me, with Yadril in Cemetery Boys, he gets dead named, but I work around it. I cut off the sentence, and instead of telling you what the name is, I tell you Yadril's reaction to it, because that's what's important about dead naming, is a trans character's reaction, how they feel, how it makes them feel, and how terrible it is. It doesn't matter what their dead name is. You need to be focusing on the feelings around it, is personally how I feel very strongly.
Yeah. Anybody else want to throw in their thoughts on that?
I was going to say that one thing that is very, because this conversation happens, but I also notice that when we talk about sensitivity or writing outside your lane, it tends to happen more in YA, middle grade, and like the kidlit spaces. And a lot of people just ignore all the other books as if like for example, like adult books don't have to deal with this sort of stuff. And I'm like, there's some nasty, terrible things in adult. They have many things they need to deal with. But the way that I frame it when educators or people who are writing or asking this question is that we need to treat this issue of representing people and communities the same way you do research for everything else. And it always feels like that extra bit of like, oh, this is a separate thing. And I'm like, no, it's the same thing. If you're going to do research on your book and determine whether something is historically accurate, part of that history is people and their identities. It should be considered exactly the same thing, and it should be considered the same thing if you're getting edits and your editor or your, the outside sensitivity reader, or authenticity editor or whatever is giving you feedback. I explain it like this: like, if you get feedback from your editor and your editor says, hey, this ending doesn't land, or this doesn't feel like it's in character, or you spelled this wrong, most of us who are professional writers don't immediately argue and are like, no, you're wrong. You don't know anything you're talking about, and I'm not going to change it. Most of us sit with it. I mean, sometimes we're like, you're actually wrong. Please don't. Stat, you're wrong. You're wrong. But for the most part, we sit with it and we're like, okay, this editor had this reaction for a specific reason. What can I do to make it better? And I think we need to consider writing about identity and writing about other communities in the same way. It's just, I view those edits as it is a new writing prompt. You've been given feedback. How do you convey the same story, but do it differently? Or is the story you're conveying wrong and you need to shift the story in another direction? So I just think we need to consider it as just part of normal editing and normal developmental or line edits.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do 2 more questions. We're going to try and do a Q&A. We're going to squeeze this in. We can do this, but this next question is really important. So talk as long as you want, screw it. This is specifically for the people of color on this panel. It's like, you know, such a specific intersection to write from, the intersection of being a person of color and being a non-binary person or being a trans person. And I would love to hear from the people of color on this panel about, you know, what are the different layers that you're grappling with? And how does that inform the choices that you're making in your storytelling?
I guess I can speak to that. I think something that Black women in particular deal with is that femininity is so attached to white womanhood specifically. And so for a long time, you know, my discomfort with femininity, I always just kind of thought it was like, maybe this is a race thing. It was like, maybe I just really can't look like a woman is supposed to look in this society. And then it kind of, you know, it kind of evolved into something a little deeper. I was like, you know, the word woman is we have such a specific image of it. And I like the word, but it doesn't feel like the word likes me back. That's sort of how I describe my identity. So I think it's important when we're writing about gender to recognize that there is an element of white supremacy to it. Like transphobia is based in white supremacy in a lot of ways, and like very specific ideas of what a woman is and, you know, what gender roles are and things that, you know, are not, you know, just natural to people. This is, you know, a sort of chosen philosophy that we've all been taught.
Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, so for me and for Cemetery Boys, a really complicated part of Yadril's experience, of my own experience, is kind of when your intersectionalities start to layer up upon each other. Even when you're like part of one marginalization, it can be really hard to find community or feel that you fit in. And when suddenly you have multiple layers of that going on, it can be really lonely, and it can be hard to find people to connect with, and even just like commiserate with, who've gone through different experiences as you. So being, I'm queer, I'm trans, and I'm Latinx, and there's not many spaces that exist where all 3 of those come together. And that can be really difficult, especially in publishing, because like when people put together panels even, or when authors connect, it's usually because of a marginalization, but because of my layered ones, it can feel like I don't fit in to some of my own marginalizations, and that's complicated. But specifically for writing Yadril and kind of the Latinx trans non-binary experience, is that our language is gendered, and that is really difficult to navigate. There's a lot, the teaching process of our friends and family whose language is Spanish suddenly becomes a lot more difficult. It'll take longer, there's more questions, there's more confusion behind it. And yeah, it's rough. But that was something that was important for me to include in Cemetery Boys. So when Yads is dead named, it's because of Spanish, or dead names, excuse me, misgendered, it's because of Spanish. And that's, yeah, there's you know, it's harder to kind of explain who you are, and when your pronouns, especially when they're, you know, gender neutral in a language that is based in gender, it's hard. There's it's a lot of emotional work, and that's difficult. That's something I wanted to incorporate in Cemetery Boys.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna take a Q&A from the chat, and then we're gonna have to hop off soon because I'm literally looking at like half the New York Times bestsellers list in the waiting room. I'm like, okay, I'm going, I promise. I have a question from somebody who wants to know how you went about finding an agent who you can trust to fight for you as a trans person or non-binary person, which I think is something a lot of aspiring writers are searching for. Victoria, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So I have two amazing agents there, Holly Root and Taylor Haggerty from Root Literary. It was really important to me when I was querying to find an agent that I was not out at the time, but it was something that I was planning to come out shortly, like within a few months. So I really wanted agents that I knew were tolerant and not transphobic. And a lot of what I was able to learn was just from looking at their social media and seeing the kinds of things they retweeted and the way that they engage with other people, the way they engage with other trans authors. And that could be really reassuring as well. I honestly feel like people show you who they are a lot of the time. And it's not just like the performative retweets, right? It's like how they speak to other people and what books they choose to uplift and what types of clients they sign. And so I think that you can take a look at things like that and get a good sense. And I will say, like with my agents, they messaged me several months ago and asked me what pronouns I wanted them to use when we were going out on submission, and like what pronouns they wanted me to use when they were talking to the foreign rights editor. And now whenever I see them refer to me, they always use they, them, just like as a gesture, even though I use all pronouns. And I think that finding agents that will be in your corner about that and will be ready to push and uplift any story you write about trans people, but also uplift and validate you as a trans author and a trans person is super important, and you shouldn't compromise on that whatsoever.
Yes. Okay, I think that is time. I honestly could sit here and talk to y'all for like another 2-3 hours, and one day we should just like hop on Google Hangouts and do that. Yeah. But thanks so much to every single one of you for joining. Thanks to everybody who's watching. Thanks to BookCon for hosting us. And yeah, follow us all on Twitter and buy all of our books. And yes, thank you guys so much. Love you guys. Love y'all. Appreciate everything that y'all are doing.
Thank you for moderating, Casey.
Yes.
It's my first time moderating, so I hope it was
You did so good.
Fantastic.
Thank y'all so much. I'm gonna we're gonna sign off. Bye.
Bye everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.